So this week on Friendship is Magic, we're going back to Appleoosa for a little story about the Cutie Mark Crusaders trying to catch an outlaw, and Applejack getting a much-needed chance to compete in a rodeo again. And taking us there is the same man who brought us the first time, writer Dave Polsky. This is Appaloosa's Most Wanted. Now actually, Dave Polsky is one of my favorite writers on this show up through Season 3, not counting games ponies play. He is credited as the story creator, but not the writer of Spike at Your Service, whatever that means, but looking at who the writer was, yeah, I have no problem blaming Dragon Quest Lady for how bad it turned out. Then came Season 4, where his episodes started to seem a lot more ordinary. Oh, he still had one or two good ones, and some of you seem to really like his foray into melodrama a lot more than I did, but nonetheless, even if his ideas were good, the execution was usually either so-so and underwhelming, or trying too hard, making characters way over the top without convincing us why they would be. But does the return to Appaloosa find him back in his element? Nah man, he's just losing his mojo. I mean, don't get me wrong, the flow and the comedy of this one is a little better than something like Twilight Time, but it still doesn't take that long to get the sense that it's not trying particularly hard to be above par. I mean, what have we got here? Let's see, the setup with how there's a rodeo in Appaloosa and a mysterious figure sabotaging it, the Crusaders want their cutie marks, Applejack's competing, some underwhelming comedy.
It's trouble shoes.
Okay, that was kind of funny.
Don't send us home! It's not fair!
Now quit your belly aching. I can't have y'all around here with some outlaw on the loose.
Yep, Applejack's the wet blanket who just doesn't understand. Well, that's one piece of this episode gone generic. Anything else?
Come on now, you head on back to practice and don't worry none about these three. I won't let them out of my sight. You hear? Y'all ain't leaving my sight.
Now, I know you're all asking the same question right now, so instead of answering, I'm gonna see who can guess. Do they A, get away when he falls asleep, B, get away when he's distracted by nothing, or C, get away because he's just that much of an idiot? Could've been worse. Actually, this kinda says a lot about how far they've come since Stairmaster. Don't get me wrong, they haven't exactly developed a great sense of maturity or responsibility since then, but their episodes have given them at least a modicum of growth and self-awareness. Having them just kid themselves like this doesn't really cut it anymore.
This ain't wandering. We know exactly where we're headed. To find troubleshoes. You don't need to capture them. The sheriff can handle that.
And granted, there's nothing wrong with it in Stairmaster. It's not in and of itself bad storytelling. It's just, you have to change with the times, you know?
Worst idea ever.
Oh, see, you remember Sweetie Belle because you wrote her last episode, but the other two, they're not even aware they might be doing something wrong.
Look! It looks abandoned. Let's go see if we can find some blankets or something.
Gee, I wonder who owns it.
You alright?
I ain't gonna rise to greet y'all. Awfully rude, I reckon, but as you can see, I'm the fresh casualty of an unusually unfortunate circumstance. My lot in life, I suppose.
Ah yes, the misunderstood gentle giant plot. And just in time for Applejack to convince everyone to be wet blankets with her.
You gotta help! My sister's gone, and her friends too!
Now, hold on there. Troubleshoe's done a lot of bad things in his day, but nothing like that.
You really want to take that chance?
Come on, y'all! Let's ride!
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
What are you doing? I'm gonna unwrap them. You can't do that! That's troubleshoes! Oh, you don't seem so bad.
Mr. Polsky, aren't you kind of worried that that sends a problematic message about stranger danger? I mean, on one hand, I do kind of appreciate stories about simpler times when Scout Finch could befriend Dolphus Raymond and Wilgus Collier could hitchhike with Fat Monroe, but still, the primary demographic here is kids who need to learn these lessons, no? Is it just me, or is he supposed to be a horse and not a pony?
Typical. Bad luck never rests.
Well, at least you didn't have to think of your own gimmick. So what more can I say about this episode now that it's finished becoming a formula story? Actually, it kinda gets better after that.
I wrangled up the guts to audition for rodeo school. Right in the middle of that tryout, I knew I was doing what I was meant to.
Troubleshoe's backstory about how he was slapped with an unlucky horseshoe for a Cutie Mark, essentially telling him that his destiny was to fail, right in the middle of a key moment in his life, is one of the saddest things you'll hear on this show. And from there it segues into a Monsters University type moral.
I can't believe those mean judges would laugh at him like that. Don't you see? They weren't laughing at him. They were just enjoying the show. Think about it. If we saw a rodeo clown doing what he did back in that shack, we'd think he was the greatest.
Now this moral on how it's always possible to do the thing you love, just maybe not the way you imagined, is another very important one, and it's slowly becoming more common over time in different variations. But there's something I like about this one in particular in the way that Applebloom phrases it. In fact, they do it again if we skip past the obligatory part where the townsfolk catch Troubleshoes and just won't listen, to where the Crusaders sneak him out of jail and enter him in with the rodeo clowns.
That's the best rodeo clown I ever seen!
What they keep pointing out is that he's great at this, not that he can do comedy as opposed to whatever else he had in mind. See, a lot of the time with this moral, there's the notion that you're settling, that you fell short of the real McCoy, especially when it involves comedy, which carries the notion that you've somehow failed to be taken seriously. And that's not a moral that anyone would really get behind, especially when that's not how you should see it. A lot of the time, people assume that comedy isn't a talent so much as a willingness to lower yourself, to act stupid for attention. And if we're talking about bad comedy, sometimes there's truth to that, but I digress. Worse than that even, sometimes people will think that acting goofy somehow reflects badly on the person in real life, that he or she somehow doesn't know how not to act that way. They don't realize how well the performer is playing them, the choices, the timing, and the energy that go into a good laugh, much less how satisfying it can really be to deliver one. There's a quote I'm too lazy to cite about the power of humor, claiming one satire like Dr. Strangelove is more effective than all the war dramas that try to portray war as it quote-unquote really is combined. And I do think there's some truth to that. Granted, some people might object that Troubleshoes is being funny by accident, but natural talent is natural talent, isn't it? Besides, that's not entirely true. He does know what to do next each time because he studied the rodeo for so long, and the more he does it, the more he'll refine it and get a sense of what works. Oh, and if any of you are thinking that it's easy to call this a good thing when you're talking about a guy like Troubleshoes, who already stands out so much anyway, keep in mind who he's learning this lesson from.
The last award of the night goes to the Cutie Mark Crusaders for Best Comedy Act. Did you see our award? Weren't we funny?
Yeah, if you remember, our three little girl protagonists happen to have first-hand experience with that moral. So why am I the one pointing that out and not you, episode? I mean, you could have, turned this into one of the greatest unlikely friendships ever if you'd had them bond over that. Come on! Well, nonetheless, the one thing Dave Polsky definitely deserves credit for bringing to the table here is another new perspective on Cutie Marks and how your quote-unquote destiny can be a complicated thing. Sometimes life can deal you a hard blow where that's concerned, and sometimes it really is up to you to make the most of what you're given, or else it can seem pretty darn miserable. But otherwise, it's not hard to see where he falls short. The original Over a Barrel is still a personal favorite of mine. The comedy, the energy, the personality on display, and just the sense of adventure, lighthearted or not, still amounts to some of the most fun I've ever had with this show. And while Cutie Map got some praise for being more ambitious than ever, it was still the kind of story where we all agreed before and after on who was right and who was wrong, where Over a Barrel was daring enough to be a parable on something that everyone might not agree on, which is the most important kind of issue to bring up. So compare it to Appaloosa's Most Wanted, and you can definitely see the enthusiasm dying down. Relying on the Crusaders being stupid to drive the plot, letting Applejack just be a stick in the mud, recycling that old gimmick of villagers who just don't understand, because they don't fucking listen, it all brings a feeling of indifference. And where even the cornier jokes in Over a Barrel worked just for being written with such good timing that gave them a real sense of fun, here they're a little more boring. The attempts to make Brayburn funny don't really work. It's like they're not sure what to do with him, so they're sort of trying the idea of making him a doofus. In fact, the only parts that are funny are one or two of the sight gags, and of course the slapstick with Troubleshoes. For whatever reason, the episode does seem excited to work with this character, and watching him stumble around so sincerely, combined with the delivery of his voice actor, Jim Miller, really is kinda funny. Maybe he should have had an even more prominent role. The only time the episode doesn't just seem to be going through the motions is whenever he's on screen. So in the end, Appaloosa's Most Wanted is my least wanted episode of the season so far.
Boo!
But still, it's not that much less entertaining than Castle Sweet Castle was. On its own terms, it holds up fine. In fact, if I were a betting man, I'd say that we're going to have worse before the season is done, because frankly, we've had worse in every season to date multiple times. This one is nothing more or less than okay. So next week, we get back to one of the newer writers for this show, and if she can do any better, it'll be one of her best episodes to date. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. If you didn't, send it to your enemies. And if you'd like to watch another video in this series, click here. Otherwise, just check the description for more links, and I'll see you next time.